So you sold the website for $700,000.
In total, we probably took about $1 million out of the business. Operationally, disastrous. And I was like, yep, that's a pretty fair summary. And the MD basically said he was like excellent at building an acquisition engine. And then when you start to get busy and you start to get closer to that point where you might be able to give up, you probably are honestly almost working two jobs.
I think you're really going to like this one. Jaden Clark is our guest today. He sold his website for $700,000 recently. And since that time, he has built more websites and he's creating a group of websites. It's going to be an amazing thing to watch, right? And the coolest part about this is I ask him questions, very specific questions throughout this interview, and he gives us the answers. He's not holding anything back. He just tells us how it is. Here's how it works. I just love it. I love transparency like that. It's really cool. But let's just jump into the interview. So we initially met after you sold your website for what, how much was it? 700,000?
Yeah, 700K US, yeah.
And how long ago was that?
Pretty much a year to the day. Yeah, October last year.
Wow. Wow. So you sold the website for $700,000, and then we were talking about like what's next. But what I wanted to talk about today is like, how did you do it? Right? How did you build a website? What type of website was it? Like, how did
Mhm.
you build a website to sell for almost $1 million?
Yeah.
So if
It was an e-commerce website, so we sold products on that site. We dealt directly with customers, and we sold on behalf of brands. Primarily, actually, we were drop shipping in essence, which gets a bit of a bad name, but the way we were doing it from domestic suppliers in sort of like the high ticket space, so like average order value in the thousands, worked really well.
this was UK based, right?
UK based indeed, although I've been a part of US stores and Australian stores as well. And there are, any developed e-commerce market, this sort of business model works well.
So if we like went back in time 2 years, 3 years, like when did you start building the website, building it? Like what was the trajectory on this thing?
Sure. So, I mean, if we go back, yeah, about 3 years, I'm working a corporate job, fairly miserable. And yeah, I decided to do this alongside my job. So for a whole year, I'm building this thing and doing all of the learning curve and everything alongside that. I had to do some learning about the business models that were available to me first. I'm not a very high propensity for risk person. So something where, like a physical products business, for example, where I needed to put down tens of thousands of inventory, for example, wasn't going to work for me. Anything where I needed to quit my job and go full time also wasn't going to work. So that's kind of how I landed on high ticket e-commerce because essentially the business model means that you need to get really good at traffic acquisition, conversion rate optimization, and essentially relationship management with the retailers you sell on behalf of and the customers you sell to. And if you can just crack that bit there in the value chain, you're going to have a successful business. And because of it being high ticket, I kind of had in my mind, right, what would it take for me to do $100,000, for example, in a month or £100,000 in a month? And how many transactions would that be? And could I feasibly look after that alongside a full time job without a big team and that sort of thing? And that's where, high ticket e commerce ticked that final box, not having to hold stock and inventory and just having to go on that learning curve of how do I profitably acquire traffic, convert it at the best rate possible, and, run a good and reputable business that, doesn't get held back by its relationships or reviews or things like that. And yeah. So once I had that, I kind of knew the path I was going down. It's a well trodden path. There's lots of these businesses, people start them all the time. So I didn't need to worry about did I have product market fit and all that sort of thing. Chose a niche, which I think people obsess over. But in this particular case, as long as you don't hamstring yourself, it's not super important. As long as you choose a niche that is viable for the business model, sure, that everyone dreams of the uncompetitive niche they can come in and tear up, but very difficult to find. Often it's about the quality of what you execute and the strategies you implement and how you run your business far more than the niche in this particular space. So yeah, chose the niche, sort of dived in, and then pretty much just I'm quite good once I have something really clear to work towards, and I was really, really certain that I wanted this to work, like desperate for this to work. And so, yeah, mornings, evenings, weekends, relentless for about a year until the business had about 80K in of pounds, maybe 100K US dollars in the business bank from profit because it's a cash flow positive business, right? So I'm not really needing to reinvest that profit too hard. And so that was my buffer. That was my like permission of, okay, cool, you've got, best part of a year's household income there that you can use as a buffer to confidently say, I'm going to go full time here and really double down on the success I've seen so far. That's what I did. It kept growing at an even kind of more frightening to some extent trajectory, which was awesome. So my wife also gave up work. She came to the end of a project. She wasn't really enjoying her job that much. She had a really tough year and a half. We were on holiday. She had the classic thing we all have. Oh, I really don't want to go back. And I just said, well, don't. And that was probably one of the coolest moments on the entire journey, was to be able to do that. She joined me and helped me out there for a bit. And now she works within our sort of portfolio of businesses, which is really cool. And then, yeah, we had the freedom and flexibility because we were our own boss. We were able to work from anywhere. A little bit further down the line, we moved to Barcelona together because we have that location freedom to run our business. That's probably the other coolest thing that we've done, along with having, a fantastic wedding paid for by the business proceeds. But yeah, I suppose the that's all sunshine and rainbows. Probably the slightly, the one cloud around that was that about the 2 year mark, this had probably grown more quickly than I was equipped at the time to handle. Operationally, more than anything, I think I'd done really well on the learning curve of, how to do that first bit I talked about of acquiring customers profitably and converting them. Then the overall foundational system of how that business operates when it's suddenly at, over 1 million in revenue and it's pretty much just me here still trying to support it. That was when things got a bit tough. So that's when I took the exit. And look, I learned heaps working with the firm that bought my company because they were the complete opposite. They were excellent at that, and they literally bought businesses that were on that growth trajectory and then plugged them into their operational team. I had a 6 month earnout, and I learned heaps from watching them essentially run my business. And now I'm in a much better place. I'm involved in 3 of these brands now and able to bring all of that learning in, which is awesome.
When we first talked, I think you still had the business. You were considering selling it,
Yeah,
and
I was close.
you were the perception was like burnout was real.
Yeah, I was cooked.
But what was the burnout from? So like you started a cool website, high ticket ecom, which we can talk about. Like there's a difference between high ticket and regular drop shipping.
For
But
sure.
like what caused you to burn out to then decide to, okay, something's got to give?
Um, a combination of things. My own makeup, in terms of I have an issue in my life. This is not business specific, but I struggle with conflict. I struggle, for whatever reason. I say for whatever reason, it's something I have unpacked because that's one of the great things about business is you do go on this journey. But when I have a situation of conflict or someone being angry, disappointed, etc., it causes my fight or flight to trigger. And so as you can imagine, when someone's spending 5, 10, 15,000 with you on an order, even if it's something as minute as a 1 day delay to a delivery or, something not quite being right, these people are used to getting what they want, right? And they've also learned to an extent typically that the way to get what they want is, to throw a tantrum in an adult form. And so that used to trigger my fight or flight. And I couldn't really relax or rest until that situation was sorted. And sometimes it's not always within your control, right? Sometimes you've got subcontractors or other people who you're dependent on. And so if those things went over overnight, I find I would wake up very stressed, right? I'm stressed because I haven't solved rather for customer X, Y, and Z. Um, I took on their worries. It always seems to be someone's wife's 60th birthday that they desperately need this thing for, or whatever it is, right? And so I took on those burdens. I felt terrible if we weren't able to deliver on them. I felt like I had tied my identity to this business, and if the business had failed them, I had failed them. And I was doing it with no help. And I was trying to be the person growing the business, running the business. I made myself such a single point of failure, to the point where there was no real ability for even subcontractors to make decisions without me. So anytime the smallest thing went wrong, it was my phone that would ring, whether it was, first thing in the morning, evenings, weekends, whatever. And just over 2 years, that did cause a hell of a lot of burnout. Luckily, I think I've come a long way in watching how you can avoid that. Don't get me wrong, it's gonna be a long journey for me. I think, the firm that bought my business basically said to me, we had a 3-month review in my consultancy period of once they'd got under the skin, what they thought, and the MD basically said he was, like, excellent at building an acquisition engine that has, a lead pipeline that we're delighted with. Operationally, disastrous. And I was like, yep, that's a pretty fair summary. And it was that second bit that caused me to burn myself out because I didn't set myself up for success really.
But you're like, okay, so you cracked the nut on like the hardest thing, which is the
Mm,
acquisition.
yeah.
So let's, how much can you share about your niche or niches you're excited about? Because let's go through the process. I pick a niche and I want to do this thing. How much money do I need to spend? And what's like my first step to acquire a client? Like, I don't talk to me about, the website build and stuff. Like, people know
No,
how to
no.
do that, but like acquisition, you're very good at. How do you do that?
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about a live example. So, and I've literally just done this, right? I've just started a new brand from scratch. Let me think so I can actually give people a realistic timeline, whilst accepting that obviously I have been on a learning curve that they would need to go on. I think we made the decision to start the brand in late August. We managed to have everything live in a position to be able to take a sale, i.e., we had brands on board that we could sell their products with permission. We had ads running to those products. We had them uploaded on a website, etc. So we can take a sale now. And therefore, we did that in about 2 months. So therefore, our first month trading was basically mid-October to present, and we've done about 54,000 in sales. Now, look, obviously that's atypical, but the process to get there is essentially pick that niche. What are you going to sell? I'm big on serving an ideal customer. So let's choose, like, just because it's the first one that comes to my head and it's one that most people can relate to, like man cave, which is quite an in vogue thing, right? People want to have a structure or something in their house where they're going to put maybe a cinema projector, a bar, pool table, poker table, wine cooler, whatever it is, right? And we can sell all of these things because it serves one ideal customer. We don't want to just produce a general store with a whole collection of products. We want to produce something that literally serves this one person. So that could be everything from the log cabin that they put in the garden to actually build the structure for this thing to all the high ticket products they put in it. And once we've done that, we need to get reputable brands to sell. So you touched on it earlier. The difference between high ticket drop shipping is that in that business model, it's very much just a fulfillment method. Whereas in low ticket drop shipping, like that almost defines the whole business. And it's basically just trend chasing in essence, because you're utilizing the fact that you can pretty much sell anything from China because you can just whack stuff up on a website and run ads to it. But you're really just trying to ride a wave of essentially, can I get people to buy the next fidget spinner or whatever it is, but ultimately you're going to have a miserable customer experience because you're going to have no control over the fulfillment process, all that sort of thing. Whereas with high ticket, you work with reputable brands in your country. So if we're doing this in the US, it's going to be brands based in the US. Now they might be manufacturing in China or elsewhere, but the key thing is they are responsible for the product, the manufacturing. They have that relationship with the factory, and they essentially they're experts in product design and manufacturing, right? They're the ones who are going to all the trade shows, understanding what does the consumer want, what do they need, what are the problems, where are the things breaking down, all these sorts of things, right? Their job is to make a fantastic product. But traditionally they're more of an old school business type, and they don't really enjoy e-commerce. They'll normally sell business to business. So like in our example here, they might sell their wine coolers to, physical retail stores and things like that. They might have relationships with buyers and interior designers and things like that. But typically, they don't enjoy, possibly even are scared of this sort of e-commerce channel, but they appreciate they need it. And so what we do is we go ahead and kind of pitch to these people that we can come on as a partner, as a supplier to bring them sales, essentially do that bit of profitably acquiring them customers and passing them sales. Let's, for example, say we're going to sell a 5,000 jukebox, $5,000 jukebox. They might be bringing it into the country, manufacturing it, warrantying it, etc., for let's say $2,000 maybe, and then they might be selling it to us at 3,750 or whatever, right? So we've got our margin in there, 1,250 of gross margin to be able to acquire the customer and sell it. They've got plenty of gross margin to be able to warranty it, bring it into the country, hold it in stock, and then ship it out. And that sort of value chain is complete, right? So once we have those on board, we have a website up, ready to take customer inquiries, get leads, etc. We generally use advertising as the initial shot in the arm, because obviously whilst SEO is a huge part of these businesses, you're unlikely to be able to make sales on commercial terms in the early part. So we sort of use advertising for that fast traffic and then layer SEO on top of that later on. Does that kind of answer the
Right.
question? That's the roadmap.
It does. Google Ads is your primary method, right?
Yeah.
And I've
And the reason
watched
sorry, go ahead.
your you. So if anyone watching this is interested, Jaden has a YouTube channel, right? Under your name, they just type in Jaden Clark, right?
Yeah, Jaden Clark.
So I was watching your channel, and it seems like the competitive edge you can have on Google is like most big firms, they do broad type of keywords. They don't match the intent, the perfect intent. Like walk us through that because that was very interesting to me, like how you do that.
That's probably the closest thing to the like, secret sauce, so to speak, of particularly high ticket advertising in Google. Because Performance Max, for example, works really poorly for high ticket. It works really poorly, mainly because there's not enough data. Performance Max relies on a huge amount of data for the engine to learn. Quite simply, you're not going to have hundreds of transactions, certainly in the early stages, when your average order value is $5,000, for example. So instead, when we run Google Ads for high ticket, well, the first thing is the reason Google and not Meta and things like that is we get intent from Google, i.e., the customer puts in a search term that tells us what their intent is. On Meta, we don't have an intent, right? We just know they belong to certain demographics. So that's why Google, because the difference in propensity to convert of a customer, let's say they're trying to buy um, a pool table. Let's continue on this man cave example, right? Someone who searches pool table versus someone who searches 7 foot mahogany pool table, and then someone who searches, 7 foot mahogany pool table with green felt. And I'll be honest, I don't know pool tables very well, under $5,000, right? You can almost see the trajectory of someone who's right at the top of the funnel, browsing, thinking, hey, maybe I'd like a pool table. Maybe that would be cool, down to someone who has a really good idea of what sort of pool table they want. They just need that product to be put in front of them, and they need to maybe decide between brand A and brand B, for example. And how we structure our advertising campaigns is make sure that we are hyper competitive on those high intent keywords. So whether it's, 7 foot mahogany pool table, or whether it's, let me think of another example, 36 bottle or X liter, X capacity wine fridge, or gets to this certain temperature. The more long tail the keyword, typically, the more value it has. And that's how we set it out at the beginning. Now, as we get data in terms of, what brings the most conversions, what brings the most leads, essentially calls, etc., then we can start to attribute even more value to certain keywords. And sometimes there are ones that are surprising, but ultimately you can start out with that structure of, right, we're going to be hyper competitive on these long tail specific keywords because they have a much higher purchase intent and a much higher um, propensity to convert. Therefore, if we're looking at £3 cost per click, for example, that's okay because we might have 1,000 pounds or dollars in gross margin. So we've got plenty of room within that. Whereas if we're trying to work within, even if it's $1 cost per click for just pool table, the propensity to convert is going to be so slim that we're going to need such a great amount of traffic for that realistically it's unlikely to wash its face even within the large gross profit that we have. And so that's how we set out our Google Ads, is intent based, and that's across both shopping and also text ads. We also find those sort of like golden keywords that are either converting really well for us or have really high intent, and we build individual text ad campaigns that are targeted just at that keyword. Because again, like you rightly said, another brand, let's say we sell, I think Brunswick sell pool tables, so let's use them. Let's say Brunswick have got they've got 10 pool tables in their range, and maybe they sell some other things as well. What most people will do, they'll set up one text ad campaign as Google wants them to, which is basically any keyword to do with Brunswick. And you'll have things like Brunswick reviews, the 10 products they sell. Maybe they sell some pool cues and balls and whatever else, right? And it will go to a generic Brunswick collection page. And what that means is that, firstly, the difference in intent between some of the keywords they're serving for and others is completely different, but they have to have one uniform bid across them all. The second is it has to go to a generic landing page, which means that Google's opinion of relevance is much lower. Because if someone has searched, Brunswick, let's call it the Brunswick Alpha 7 foot pool table, and they're just landing on a generic Brunswick page, the relevance is lower than if they're landing on that exact product page, which is, all the heading structure, all the SEO, for example, on page optimization has been done for that keyword. So If we run these really hyper focused single ad group text ads, not only do we get to choose the exact keywords we want to show for and how valuable they are to us, and therefore outbid everyone else, we also don't need to outbid everyone quite as much because our quality score is so high, and where Google's a weighted auction, because our quality score is so high, because we're sending it to the direct hyper relevant landing page, normally the product page. That means that overall in the weighted auction, when bid is multiplied by quality score, we typically do very well. Not to mention user signals are normally great because what's a user going to interact with more, the product page of exactly what they search for, or a collection page they have to sift through to find it.
Do you think your big dog competitors, let's say we had pool tables, depot.com, whatever, the biggest dog on the block, right? Pool
Hmm.
tables, we're selling pool tables. What I'm hearing is maybe the person in house for them is just not doing a great job and they're doing broad term matches and they're sending people to collection pages with like broad intent. Whereas you, I mean, I'd be so curious. Like, let's say you know someone's typing in, people type in 7 foot pool tables,
Hmm.
right? First off, somehow you know that. So the question becomes, how do you know people are typing that in, right? Quite literally, how do you do that? Is that Google Keyword Planner? How are you doing this?
Yeah, we'll start with that. So, a few things. The first is that where we run that shopping funnel that I talked about earlier, where some people will be searching pool tables, some will be searching, something 7 foot pool table, etc., etc. The reason we don't just go after the high intent terms, and we still have a campaign that will show up for things like pool tables, is because we do also want to gather data. So we still have ad campaigns that serve in the generic broad space. We just bid far less competitively. We might be happy with an impression share of 10% over there. Now, in our campaigns where we've got things like 7 foot mahogany pool table, for example, we might be shooting for an 80% impression share. But we still want to have skin in the game in those generic search terms. And the reason for that is that over time, some of them will convert. And we'll look back retrospectively, and those that do convert have shown themselves to be higher intent, and therefore we'll move them essentially down the funnel in terms of our opinion of them, and down the funnel in terms of higher purchase intent, higher spend, higher cost per click. So that's the first thing, is our ad campaigns will gather data as they run, and as they gather data and we're seeing certain keywords generate, more add to carts, more calls, more purchases, we get to learn which of the more generic keywords actually have higher purchase intent, maybe the ones we didn't originally find in keyword research or even assume sometimes. And then the second thing, of course, is keyword research. My tool of choice is Ahrefs. I know a lot of people that kind of is quite an expensive one. You can do this with Ubersuggest, Google Keyword Planner. I know Ahrefs have got that. I think it's $27 starter pack, and the keyword research side of this you can do within that. I don't think you can export, which is a bit of a pain, but with GPT and whatever these days, you can get the data out of there. But typically, I will be taking all of the parent keywords associated with the product types we sell, and I'll just be looking through all the related keywords. And you have to put a bit of a business owner lens over it here and sort of think, okay, let me look at all the related keywords here and let me try and see which ones indicate that a customer is further down the funnel or more in a browsing state. And yeah, initially you have to take some educated assumptions until the data is then there. And some keywords have to move the opposite direction into lower bids, lesser bids and higher up the funnel, because actually what we thought was a really high intent keyword isn't washing its face or proving to be. Now it's had some time in the ad campaign. So we're constantly evolving and moving things up and down as the data informs it, but we have to take some educated guesses as well.
In the beginning of our talk, you said that you are adverse to risk. Therefore, I imagine you manage your ad sets very carefully. How often do you go in there and kind of taste the soup as the head chef and change things?
Yeah, interestingly, even though I am a risk averse person, I am also a 80/20 sort of person. So I am willing to accept that by not being as attentive to the ads as I perhaps could be. If we look at a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably about a 7 in terms of stringency of being in those ad campaigns. I'm happy to get it 80% right because the rewards and the opportunity cost on that extra 20% is a huge amount of additional time. To be honest, I think it's realistic to run one of these campaigns. In fact, I reckon I probably spend 1 hour a week per maybe 1 hour a fortnight, to be honest. And that is making the decisions. And then there's probably another 1 or 2 hours for my team on actioning things off the back of that. And part of that is because the way I set these up is quite formulaic initially, so it makes it quite easy to see this information and to act upon it. And everything's quite clean and neat, so it's quite easy to move things around. And then also part of that is obviously experience. So for someone newer, it might look more like 3 or 4 hours if they're doing both the interrogation and the work themselves. But we're certainly not talking about a full-time job or anything here. And the further through the process you get, the more stable your ads will become, because the learning period, as you can imagine, is very intense at the beginning. But after a year, sure, you'll still be doing it, but your ads will be far closer. They're never truly set and forget, but they'll be much closer.
Let's pretend I want to create $1 million brand. I want a $1 million exit to a PE firm or whatever, acquisition firm.
Hmm.
So tell me what I have wrong here. I'm going to go down the line quickly. I pick a niche that's high ticket that I can source locally
Yep.
that will ship across the whole nation. Let's pretend I'm in America.
Hmm.
I build out my Shopify website,
Hmm.
and then I figure out my ads, my Google ads, right? I ship the ads, I let them simmer for a month, see what happens. Is this it?
So at that point, you're probably at, I would say, like you've made it to say level one. And I think you could realistically get all of that live, ready to take a sale in probably 2 months. And then you might spend another few months doing heavy ad optimization, some conversion rate optimization, and bringing more brands on board, right? Because, some of the better brands aren't going to work with you right out of the gate. Okay. And then beyond that, the next thing you need to do is diversify as heavily as possible, because at this point a private equity firm is probably unlikely to touch your brand because it's quite indefensible, right? I can come in to your niche and potentially outcompete you in the ads, and I can maybe have deeper pockets and drive CPCs up really high. Maybe one of your best brands goes direct to consumer, that sort of thing. Like, it's relatively indefensible at that point. So this is the time where we would need to layer on a huge amount of organic traffic. And the biggest reason for that, there's two reasons for that. The first is that it's more defensible. It takes longer for someone to come in and disrupt that part of your, acquisition makeup. And the second part of that is because in ads, we perform very well at the bottom of the funnel. Now, in SEO, we can perform well on those high intent keywords, but we can also start to perform at the top of the funnel as well, because we can start to rank not only for some of the more generic keywords, but also for informational keywords. For example, product A versus product B. What size of pool table do I need? How am I going to install it? All these sorts of things. With these high ticket products comes a lot of informational and browsing search terms that we can start to rank for through SEO. And now we cover so much more of the customer journey. Like, the average amount of touch points is believed is about 27 to sell a high ticket product. The more of those touch points we have with the customer, and they're never all going to be you. I might decide I want to buy a pool table, and I do some Googling. I also do some look on Pinterest to see the style I like. I watch some videos. I go and see one in person. Like, these are all touch points, right? And we can never have a true monopoly over them. But the more we have with the customer, the more likely we are to be the ultimate place they choose to buy from. So that's when we start to layer on, can we make some kind of like informational content that ranks in SEO? Can we make some informational content that ranks on YouTube? Can we layer on top some retargeting so that when they come to our site and they either read one of our articles or look at some of our products or browse our collections, that we then bring them back into our ecosystem through retargeting? Can we get them on our email list and build a relationship there? Can we get some affiliates pushing traffic to our business so that we then have external traffic sources as well? These are all the things that we then need to layer, not to mention we need to get a deep understanding of our customer. And the whole value of being the best in market at the acquisition side of things is that we have more room in our margins to do a superior job serving the customer. And that is an integral piece, is that people in high ticket have more needs than someone buying a t-shirt, right? If I'm going to buy, let's use a slightly different let's use the actual man cave itself, the log cabin. If I want to buy a log cabin to put in my garden that I'm going to turn into a man cave, what I might need is information on, am I going to need planning permission or permission from the local, council authority, whatever it is? Am I going to need a certain base, some concrete down? Can I put it on grass? What's it going to look like? How much is it going to cost to install? Can I get electricity in there? How all these things, right? The more of these questions, objections, and blockers that we can help the customer with, the more chance we have of turning them into a lead, getting them on our email list, getting them bought into buying through us. And because we do such a superior job in acquisition, we therefore have more of our acquisition budget to spend on team time to do more of these things, which ultimately means we then pair together essentially the best in the market at conversion rate optimization and offer with the best in the market of acquiring traffic. And that's when you really start to be that sort of market leader with defensible traffic that's going to be really attractive to a PE firm.
Okay, understood. So let's go through a process. So I told you up the road, there's Amish community. I live in Maryland near Pennsylvania. There's a lot of Amish people. And what Amish are known for is like building really good things, right?
Hmm.
They're good craftsmen and they're fairly affordable too. I'm having something built right now, but they're not good marketers inherently because, they're adverse to using the internet to begin, right?
Hmm.
But people type in things such as Amish sheds or Amish XYZ. So something like that, that would be considered high ticket because a shed might cost 10 grand, 5 grand.
Hmm.
So what would be the MO? What would be the play there for you? Let's pretend that was your niche you're going to go after.
Yeah. So essentially, I would firstly validate that there is enough, search volume and that sort of thing for these. Not in the States, so I don't know, but let's take it that there is. Let's take there's enough search volume there. I'd probably want to see that, the parent keyword maybe has, let's say, 15,000 searches a month, and then the sort of like tertiary keywords, maybe they add up to 25, 30K in search terms a month. My biggest concern about the niche would be that it's single product. So I really like niches where I can sell more than one thing to people, but that's not out of the question here because some people might be buying their armor shed to make it into a games room or a home office, or maybe in the future I can sell them standing desks, or I can sell, things like this, because the more I can sell to repeat customers that don't have that come with that cost of acquisition, the better. Also, the more times that I can acquire someone and I say, hey, what are you going to use this armor shed for? And they say, oh, actually, I'm making a home office. And I can say, fantastic, let me sell you this standing desk, chair, speaker system, whatever. Obviously, now I've padded out my average order value with one cost of acquisition. My profitability is better. Anyway, let's say
So
we're
you
going
don't,
ahead. Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
before we go on, to clarify, you won't build a website just on billiard tables then. You'll do the man cave website with many products.
Exactly. And I will, and this is getting a little bit off tangent, but I will peel the onion on the why and the emotion behind. So let's use the man cave example. It's like, most people say, why does someone want a man cave? Well, they want somewhere in their home that they can have a few drinks and play some pool, play some darts, whatever, with their friends. And it's like, well, really, actually, what's probably happened is that person is feeling a bit disconnected from their friends, their buddies. When they were maybe a bit younger, they used to go out and have a drink at the bar, or they used to have social plans. It doesn't really happen anymore. They want to create somewhere that incentivizes them to be able to invite people over and sort of feel like one of the guys again and that sort of thing. Like that's the actual why behind why someone buys one of these. Like, ultimately someone doesn't drop 10 grand on this just because they want to have some beers in their home. They can do that in their living room or their garage or whatever without needing to, right? The why is emotional. It always is with pretty much any purchase, but particularly with high ticket, you get a lot further playing on the emotion than you do playing on the functionality. Because typically, the same reason like people don't buy a Lamborghini to get from A to B, they probably buy one because they got a status problem, right? Like, no offense to anyone with a Lamborghini. Um, so that's the first thing is I'll decide what the end state emotion is of the customer I want to serve, and if it's that man cave person, I'm going to decide, okay, so my whole store, all the copy, all of the imagery, the messaging, it's all going to sell the idea of this end state that they're trying to achieve, right? So I would, yeah, in that exact way, I wouldn't just be selling a pool table because there's no real emotion behind buying that pool table, but buying it to put in their man cave so that they can invite their friends over and have great fun and laughs and memories playing pool together. That's where I would like to play.
Is it so? I see two reasons to do this. Which one's more important? So if I do a man cave website, I have multiple products, therefore I have multiple shots at goal, right?
Hmm.
Because maybe the billiards table sells or maybe the wine cooler sells. We don't know.
Yeah,
But is there also the play for like bigger order value?
100%. Yeah, yeah, in my
So can
first
people do
business.
that? Will they buy multiple products from you?
Absolutely. In fact, if you're doing your job right, it'll happen more and more often because we talked about earlier that offer and conversion rate piece. If you're doing a great job at, let's go back to the example of someone comes in, let's say you sell the structures. Let's say we decide, okay, on my man cave store, I'm going to sell these armor sheds. Okay. And someone calls me and they say, hey, I want an armor shed because I'm going to make a man cave in my garden. I'm going to have a pool. And you're going to say to them, okay, tell me about the requirements so that I can help you understand how big does it need to be? How's it going to be laid out? How much size, what sort of foundation you're going to need for it, all this sort of thing. And as part of that conversation, they might tell me, well, I need it to be big enough to fit like an area that I'm going to watch movies in, but also I want to be able to have a pool table in there. I want to be able to walk around it. And then I want a bar in the corner. It's like, right, okay, now I can put together. And, we have people in Indonesia, subcontractors who are brilliant at these like visualizations essentially. So for like 10 US dollars, we can have someone see this armor shed in their garden in a sort of visualization with, and then the inside they see the pool table, they see the bar, they see the home cinema area, and then obviously the quote that comes with that includes all the different products that make up this desired end state that we sell. And now we have one cost of acquisition, and ultimately we've bundled a load of products together, and so our profitability goes through the roof in those cases.
You know what's interesting to me? I'm seeing a commonality. So the last podcast with Seth, so Seth came on. So what happens is people call him and he owns the client relationship
Mhm.
and he helps guide them through this thing. Therefore, he gets as much value as possible. It's the same thing you did.
Yeah. 100.
Interesting. But that
And
that
look,
was okay, coming full circle. That was potentially what led to the initial burnout because you were fielding all the calls.
yeah, and that's something I'm having to address now. So, for example, I literally have some interviews on Monday to hire some people for a couple brands. Um, Again, this is something I was fortunate with where I sold to this firm. They have those people in place, those salespeople. For transparency, I'm hiring from South Africa in this case because for me, running businesses in the UK, they have like a Western culture, native spoken English, but ultimately the cost of living there is very different to me hiring someone from the UK. But particularly, the people I have interviews with, they work in sort of like the winelands, like hospitality districts. So they're very used to dealing with people who are spending thousands, if not tens of thousands, and want very high level service, building rapport. And that was the sales team that I was really impressed with that took over my last business. And I was really impressed with the way they were able to replicate. And look, we always think no one's ever going to be able to do it as well as we can. But to be perfectly honest, they probably can because they're not going to be burnt out like I was. And then also, even if they do it, 80% as good as I was able to, that now frees me up to pull more of these levers to keep the taps on so that I can, because, ultimately I got to a point with that business where we were having to turn, business away because the acquisition engine was so strong, but I physically couldn't cope with the operations of it. Now, if I solve that problem, with these people, firstly, I get the enjoyment of running the business to go way up because that was the bit that burnt me out. And secondly, it also frees me up to keep, widening and widening the pipeline of business so that we can grow that much larger and much faster than we were able to last time.
You sold your website for 700K to a
Hmm.
firm that you stayed on board for 6 months as a consultant.
Yeah.
If I wanted to do that, what are my expectations? We talked about time, but what are my expectations of initial ad budget to test
Hmm.
the idea? And what is my expectations on if it goes well, you can make this much per year, which is valued at $1 million exit.
Yeah. So I guess first things first, the ad budget. I would say you can probably do it for as little as maybe $1,500. I would personally feel more comfortable in and around the $3,000 region. And that is because the conversion cycles are slow. You might, when you start one of these business, you are starting from zero momentum, right? And you can kind of imagine once the business is running, you will have people in the pipeline whose first interaction with you was 35 days ago, and then they purchased. The problem is when you're at day zero, you don't have any of that. So you're from standing start. So it might take you longer to start converting that ad budget back into cash. So I think about $3,000 is the sweet spot of not hitting a point where cash flow is limiting your ability to advertise in your business. I also just don't think people who are financially stressed typically make very good business decisions. So again, I think if someone said to me, "I've got 1,500," I might say, "Okay, let's start building and see if you can do some building in tandem with saving a bit more of a buffer up." So that's a fair estimate. And then I would say I see people all the time. I mean, I'm in a community. I have a community as well where I coach people doing this. I've probably spoken with, hundreds of high ticket business owners. It's very, very common. In fact, in 99% of cases, they do it alongside a full-time job until it's making, whatever their nut is, 30K a year, 50 a year, 100 a year, which was closer for me. Um, and that is very realistic, but it's going to be a sacrifice, right? Because you probably do still need in the beginning 15 to 20 hours a week, and then when you start to get busy and you start to get closer to that point where you might be able to give up, you probably are honestly almost working two jobs. I probably was working 80, 90 hours a week. Now, that was probably a little bit excessive, but there is going to be a pinch point where it gets worse in terms of how hard you're working before it gets better. And then suddenly all your time is spent on this. So I think, a realistic expectation is to need to work hard. In terms of trajectory, I think it's very realistic to within 18 months to 2 years have a full-time salary out of one of these businesses. I know plenty of people who have been making six figures off one of these businesses within 18 months to 2 years, myself included. It supported me and my wife, who both had good corporate jobs prior. So none of those things are out of the question. In fact, actually, I would say the success rate of people who stick at it for long enough is very, very high. The biggest point of failure is people sort of ducking out. It's the same thing as always, right? It's that long term to gratification that most people struggle with, and I can understand why, because it does feel a little bit like you're pushing a boulder up a hill to begin with.
What excites me is like you are built this your model is a sellable asset. So there's going to be different types of people. People who are excited about replacing their income is one sort of
Hmm.
person, and that's cool. And that's a large part of the audience on YouTube, like right
Hmm.
here watching. But there's also going to be people who are only excited if they can build something that is big time sellable, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm moving towards is like I only undergo projects that I know can be exited.
Hmm.
So if you sold yours for 700,000, how much was the company making in order to be valued at that?
Yeah, we got about 3.5x. And so, we were sort of in the, and look, you kind of do negotiations with what you can and can't count to an extent. It's always on net profit, right? So depending on which sort of accounting estimate you took, we were probably in the region of 150 to 200K USD in terms of net profitability at the point that we were valued and sold. And that's on the trailing 12 months before the sale, right? And obviously that fluctuates every month that ticks by while you're in the market. It adjusts slightly, but ultimately you're getting 3 to 4 years worth of payout for what you've built whilst collecting that from the business. I think in total, we probably took about $1 million out of the business, including the net profit on top of the actual sale value as well. And the great thing is, all the time, every time you put that every time you put that bit of work into the business that moves the dial, you don't just move the asset value by the extra, say, 20K profit you put on it. You move the asset value by 80K because of the profitability. Sorry,
Wow.
the multiple on the profitability.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that much. You drew that much out. Amazing. So when you take something to market, how long was the romance period? How did you take your website to market? Was it a platform? How do you do it?
Yeah, so I used a broker. I don't know whether I would do that again. But basically, we used Flipper first and foremost. I had a hope that the broker was going to be able to sort of take me to his network, essentially. That didn't happen. I think ultimately a UK business is far more appealing to UK buyers, which makes it more difficult to sell in the UK. You sell one of these businesses far more easily in the US, and I know lots of people who have exited one of these in the US with a lot more ease than I did. Probably took about 2 to 3 months for me to find a buyer and get a letter of intent, which happens after about a week or two. So, the buyer, you do a pretty comprehensive listing with the help of the broker that sort of talks about P&Ls, it talks about all the fundamentals of the business. They read that, they have a chat with you, they dig, interrogate, whatever. And then based on what you've presented, they'll give you a letter of intent, which says, based on what you presented, we'll give you 700K for the business. And then due diligence starts, assuming you accept. And we did about 8 weeks of due diligence. I think maybe slightly less in the end because there was taxation change in the UK that we had to rush it through before, which saved me 10% worth of tax on the exit. So it was very welcome that we were able to do that. But yeah, it was probably a 5 or 6 month process from deciding I wanted to do it to getting that payout, which is probably a little bit slower than is typical. But like I say, there was primarily the two factors of that. Were the first one was I'd created a huge amount of owner's risk by being so operationally shaky, which meant they had to do a bit more due diligence and a bit more kind of contracting work. And that's why I was tied in for so long as well. It's more typical to get a 1 or 2 month consulting period, but because again, I'd created a lot of owner's risk, they couldn't, give me the cash and have me sail off into the sunset. So yeah, but even then, 6 months, you're still running the business, you're still making money while you're doing it. So it's not the end of the world.
And these guys must be fairly confident coming in with 700 grand cash, whether or not they get a loan, who knows. When you witnessed what they did, which I'm sure you learned a lot, like, did they throw gas on the fire and it just ramped up revenues? What did they do?
It's actually softened very slightly. So I reckon it's about 10 to 20% down in the first year, but this is a long-term pursuit for them. This is a 20-year business pursuit for them, and they have multiple other brands. So they're not looking for their money. Ultimately, they've paid, I think in the end, they paid about a 3.5x multiple. Ultimately, they don't need this business to pay their money back in 3.5 years. If it pays them back in 4.5 or 5 years, they're still right side up because ultimately this is a long term pursuit for them. They are funded by private ultra net worth individuals. I can't talk too much, but basically they had a business that was they had it pre-COVID. It boomed hugely in COVID, and it was the demand surge was insane. COVID, in inverted commas, ended, and therefore demand returned back to normal rates. But they had this huge team, right? They had people who worked in their warehouse, people who worked in logistics, customer service, marketing, all these things that were now redundant because the 40x surge in demand had now pretty much gone away. And so they took this essentially ultra high net worth investment to now buy other businesses and plug them into this operating kind of like setup. And the thing is, they get huge economies of scale right off the bat, right? Everything that I have that is for one business, they split across, I think it's these days 6 or 7 different brands, huge economies of scale. So straight away, they don't need the business to be making quite as much because their bottom lines have reduced, and that's so it's a very clever setup, and it was a really nice kind of like marriage of someone who needed that operational infrastructure and someone who had it ready to plug in but needed the acquisition engine.
I imagine you've evolved since, a year ago, right? I'm excited to see what you do moving forward. Like, what's the plan? What are you up to?
Few things. So the first thing is I'm building one of my own groups of these e-commerce businesses. So I'm invested into 20% ownership, and I have one of my own that I own 100% of. I'd like to get to the point where I own five, 100%, I think, and then have a couple with, I think one of the ones I own a minority share and will probably exit in the next year. That'll be really cool. Another injection of cash. Sure, my piece will be 20% rather than 100%, but it's still, a great injection. I can choose to either inject that into the group over here, or enjoy it. But yeah, that's gonna be the first thing because I want to enjoy those economies of scale, right? And as I get better at leveraging my own time, I kind of have a really strong understanding of the playbook, and obviously that's ever evolving. But as I get better at knowing how to systemize that so my team can implement it, or getting the team to build out automation so it can be done, using AI, for example, the velocity at which we can build these businesses to the spec I want is so much quicker than it was a year or two even ago. So I would like to, over the next 3 years, build out 5 brands that are in this group so that all the operational side of things, we have one warehouse because we will look to hold some stock in the future. One warehouse, one customer service team that supported, or one marketing team that are trained on my sort of playbook, that sort of thing. So I guess that's my long term vision. And then, who knows, maybe the exit will be 5 to 10x what it has been previously if I choose to take it, or maybe I'll be so pleased with how it's operating, maybe we'll sell off pieces. Who knows? And then in the meantime, I also have a community of other like-minded business owners, which I really enjoy being a part of. As you mentioned earlier, I'm creating my YouTube content. I'm trying to basically just give away all these strategies and in the hope that other people will get success out of them. And yeah, just enjoying where I'm at the moment.
I think that's a natural end, right? If they want more information, now they know where to find you. So thanks, man. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So there you have it. I mean, Jaden, thank you so much for taking the time being transparent with us. That is awesome, right? Not many people are that transparent with this stuff. They want to keep the secret sauce to themselves, but you just gave it all to us. Thank you very much. High ticket e-commerce, very, very interesting, right? And I was surprised when when Jaden said it only takes, a test of around $3,000 towards ad budget to see viability. But anyways, hope you like this. Make sure to subscribe. We had a great podcast before this one with Seth. It's a very different way to make money, but interesting nonetheless. And if you want to learn how to use AI to make money online, make sure to join the Rank Expand Academy. I'm the owner over there. There's hundreds of members. This is one of the fastest growing school communities on the whole platform on how to use AI to make more money ASAP.